married to a Norwegian prince, and she had a daughter. She died in childbirth. The daughter was only 6 years old. Her name was Margaret. She was known as the Maid of Norway. And when she was only 6 years old in 1286, when something really horrible happened. Well, before I tell you about the horrible thing, let me tell you that King Alexander III, now a man approaching his 50s, felt that or maybe even 60s, he had to remarry. He had to create an offspring, an heir. And so he married a French princess. Her name was Yolande. She's known in history as being rather petulant. She was young. I think she was about 14. And it must have been a very weird thing for her to marry this much, much older man. They hadn't been married very long, and not even a year, when in 1286 January, Alexander III was coming back from Edinburgh. He was attending Parliament, and he wanted to return home on the other side of the River Forth to return to his bride. And he was told by everyone not to go. There was a storm raging, and nobody, the wee man at the boat down at the Forth River didn't want to take him across. Nobody wanted to venture out into the Forth River. It was a violent, cold, stormy night. But the king insisted, and there was nothing to stop him. So he was ferried across the River Forth. He and his horse carried on, galloping towards Kinghorn, where we don't know what happened, because in the morning his body and the body of his horse were found dashed against the rocks in Kinghorn Bay. Now, we don't know if it was sabotage. We don't know if it was an accident. Nobody ever learned the truth. But what we do know is that Scotland was plunged into a very precarious situation. Suddenly, there was no king. There was no heir. They waited long enough to see if Yolande was pregnant, but she was not. I think she was sent back to France. What do the Scots do? Well, what I haven't told you is that King Alexander's sister was the wife, or had been the wife, of King Edward I of England. So Edward I of England and his wife, who was the sister of Alexander III and Alexander's wife, it was Edward's wife who was the sister. Anyway, it was Alexander's wife who was the sister of Edward. Anyway, they were very close. They used to go on holiday together. The King and Queen of England, the King and Queen of Scotland. But Edward of England thought that he had a right to come into Scotland and help the Scots out in their time of trouble. There was no direct heir, so they had to start looking widely, advancing the circle around the king and find people who were next in line. They found 3 people who were all equidistant. They were John Balliol, Robert Comyn, Robert Comyn's the progenitor of the Cummings family, and Robert Bruce, the grandfather of Robert the Bruce. And these guys were all equidistant. They came together and had to make a decision about who would be king. Edward and his army came up from England and helped them with force, helped them to select the weakest of the 3, and that was John Balliol. John Balliol was crowned King of Scotland and immediately was forced to swear allegiance to the King of England. His crown was taken from his head, his tabard was torn and ripped in half, his gown, and he was chucked into prison. Edward took over as overlord of Scotland, and he ruled in the way he did things, with might and with violence. All of the people, all of the men in Scotland, all the landowners were forced to sign a document known as the Ragman Roll. Edward came with his army to Berwick on Tweed, and everyone was forced to turn up and sign this oath of allegiance. Now, if they didn't, their lands, their titles were stripped from them and they were killed. So what's the option? Well, there were many people who didn't sign, and not many, but certainly several. And one of them was William Wallace's father. William Wallace was not he was not the eldest brother. He was something like I think it was like the third son. So he wasn't standing in line to inherit the title or the lands, and he was a young man. He knew that his father hadn't signed. They lived over in the west of Scotland, and they would not swear allegiance to this king who had done nothing for the Scots and had a rather violent track record, and was proving that history was correct. So, sadly, William Wallace, away from his home when the English army arrived, and they murdered Wallace's mother, father, brothers, hung them in the barn, set the barn on fire, and Wallace stood on the hill. When he returned home, he saw the carnage. And that's probably when he vowed that he would never, ever, ever submit to such a monster as Edward I. And he didn't. He made it his life's work at that point to fight for freedom in Scotland. Now, things went from bad to worse to the Scots. Edward made good his promise. He captured the castles. He captured Stirling. He installed all his men to hold all these places. He burned towns. He burned fields. People were starving. He was awful. And meanwhile, Wallace was going around trying to form an army. He was very persuasive. He talked people into coming with him. What do you have to lose? You know, you can almost hear him saying it. What do you have to lose? You can either go with him or you can come with me and fight. You know, is your life worth anything if you don't have freedom? And he did form an army, and he trained them. He trained them in the art of guerrilla warfare. By the time Stirling Castle, and he started fighting the English. Now, the English, you'll know the story of how the mayor of the sheriff, the English sheriff who was holding Lanark, actually murdered Wallace's wife. And that is true, Helen Braidfoot. And Wallace, I'm sure that just added to his hatred to this monstrous king. But he did start winning against the king, and he was able to fight not with a large organized army, not with the might and all the fancy uniforms, but he was able to fight with with his brain. And Edward was angry. Edward was getting angrier and angrier by the moment. And the last big battle, the big showdown came at Stirling, when Wallace lured the English over the bridge. Now, the bridge was the only way that you could get up to the other side of the River Forth and get into Stirling Castle. You couldn't get to Stirling any other way. The River Forth meandered its way around the castle, around the rock, in this soft, boggy ground, this mossland. And William Wallace had some of his soldiers weaken the bridge the night before the battle, pull some of the port pegs out, and then he lured the English over. And you're going to see this again at the Battle of Bannockburn, because if you can get the English army into single file, you've got them, because they bet on a big, massive attack. But if you can get them into a single file, you can pick them off and say, come over the bridge. But it was even better than that, because what Wallace did was the bridge was weakened. The cavalry came over first. That's the way Edward I always fought. The cavalry came in first to intimidate everybody, and they were huge, big, huge war horses, and these knights from all over Europe who came as freedom fighters to join the English army. And they had the most beautiful uniforms, and their horses were dressed in chainmail as well as the knights. So they were heavy war horses, heavy knights, and they were lured onto this bridge that was weak. The bridge collapsed, chaos. You get these knights and their horses falling into the River Forth. You get Wallace's men coming around in pincer movements, coming around the back. You get men, English men in the army, stacking up on each other. The archers couldn't get any purchase. The spearmen couldn't get any purchase. They were falling over bodies. I mean, the Battle of Stirling Bridge is fantastic. It was a wonderful win for the Scots and a horrible humiliation for the English. Now Edward went home, and as the song says, he went homewards to think again. Sadly, he did think again. He did think again, and he sent his bigger army back to Scotland to recapture the castles, to hold them this time, and to steal the Stone of Destiny, and to take it down to English and show the Scots once and for all that they were no longer a nation, that he was Lord. That's the way he fought. And Wallace was his number one enemy, and he vowed that he would not die seeing Wallace alive. Now I want you all to look to the left. Start looking to the left, because you will see the great Kelpies, these great horses rearing up. They are the Kelpies. Kelpies are an interesting Scottish mythical beast, a horse that will attract you to it and then take you off into deep water and drown you. They're not a nice member of the fairy world, but they do mark the beginning of the canal, where the little inlet where the big tall ships would come in from the Forth River, which is over on your right. You can't see the river, but it's there. And the big tall ships would come in the North Sea. They would go up through the Carron River into the man-made canal that the Kelpies are guarding. And then they would follow the canal across, just straight ahead of us, and down to the left a bit, across to the Atlantic Ocean. So from the 1770s, as I mentioned to you before, there was a canal that was built between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Two separate ends coming together at Falkirk. One a shallow canal for canal boats, the other a deep canal for the big seafaring boats. And this was a huge revolutionary thing, because it meant that in the late 1700s, boats, big ships, no longer had to make the treacherous journey around the north and west of Scotland to get over to the colonies. And remember, all the trade was over there. It was all with you guys, because that's where Scotland was allowed to trade. So, the Kelpies are part of the new, part of the motorway art projects. We have a lot of interesting artwork along the motorway, and they're decorating the beginning of that section of the canal. So anyway, what about the Battle of Bannockburn? Well, we're going to leap forward now. Wallace did very well with his men, but then he started losing, and he was ultimately captured in 1305. He was captured, betrayed, not by Robert the Bruce, actually. He was betrayed by John of Menteith. The Hollywood movie got it wrong. They twisted history to their own ends. But he was betrayed, just leave it at that. And the English army was waiting for him at Dumbarton Castle in 1305. They took him down to London in chains, and there he was given a traitor's trial. Tried for treason, I should say, and the king, of course, there was no trial. It was mock, but King Edward I saw to it that he was charged with treason and given a traitor's death, and you all know what that is. You are hanged until you're nearly dead, then you're cut down and you're split open and your innards are taken out while your eyes are still open. And then you're castrated so that none of your seed can fall forward, you can't produce anymore, not that you could, and that's the end of that. I mean, then you're quartered, your arms, your legs, your trunk, your head, everything cut off and put on spikes around the country. So, if you were lucky, you might have gotten Wallace's head. If you were a little less lucky, you might have gotten a leg or an arm. It was a brutal way to die, but it was the traitor's death, and it was thought to be the worst possible way to die. Well, Wallace, of course, ushered those famous words. He was given one last chance over and over and over. Edward just wanted to hear him swear allegiance to him, and of course he never would. Not that it was going to change the outcome. And Wallace was executed at Smithfield. We're going to go to Smithfield, where the market was, on 23rd of August, 1305, a market day, so the maximum number of people could witness this. Edward was truly a grisly king in many ways. Well, what happened to Scotland? Scotland was nursing its wounds, and Robert the Bruce, grandson of the original Robert Bruce, I don't know what happened to Robert Bruce. I guess he had died, and father had died. Robert was a young man. He took over where Wallace left off, and he started gathering a force. And it was hard for him to build a force of men, but he did it. He started fighting the English, and he lost. And he lost the second battle. He lost the third battle. He lost the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh battles. And then he took himself off to a cave where he was contemplating his future, reading the want ads, figuring out what he could do with his life. And he watched while a spider tried to weave her web in the doorway of the cave. Now, the first time she started, the wind blew and her beginnings were ripped to shreds. She swung her silk across, started again, and she got farther this time, but once again the wind blew and her web was torn apart. She tried 7 times, and 7 times her web was destroyed by the wind. But she kept trying, and on the 8th try, she spun a beautiful, strong web. She laid her eggs, and I have to tell you, this is when you hear that wonderful Hollywood music coming in over the loudspeaker, because it was exciting. That spider succeeded. Now, is this a story? I don't know, but it is a legend associated with Robert the Bruce. We do know that the story is associated with him, that he noticed the spider, and he took this as a message from God that he should return, he should try again. He did come back, and he was winning then, battle after battle after battle. He had to, Robert the Bruce, I didn't tell you one bit about him, and that was that he had to kill off, before he went to the cave, he had to kill off his one competitor, and that was the Red Comyn. He had to kill him, and I don't think he intended to kill him. They turned up in Dumfries to have a wee chat together, perhaps about how they were going to have a coalition government. I don't know. The meeting was in the church, and tempers must have flared because things got out of hand, and before you know it, oops, the knife slipped. The Red Comyn was dead, and unfortunately it happened behind the high altar. So that wins Robert the Bruce immediate excommunication. So he took himself immediately to Scone Palace. Of course, the Archbishop couldn't crown him because he was excommunicated, but he did find, I think it was the Countess of Buchan, who was willing, she placed the crown on his head. So he was king, but this was part of his PR problem. He had to get people behind him. And there were still followers of Comyn who were mad at Bruce for killing him. But after he started winning the battles, things went from stronger to stronger and even stronger yet. He really was emerging the hero and the godly king that these people wanted. The last battle took place on the 23rd of June, 23rd and 24th of June, just last Monday and Tuesday, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I guess, 1314. So this is the 700th anniversary of the Battle of Bannockburn. And I'm going to leave off there because you're going to see how the rest of the story unfolds. And unfold with lots of drama. We're going to go to the new Bannockburn Exhibition Center. As I said, it's just opened up in April. None of us guides have even been in to see it. They have been not willing to give us any training days here, so I can't tell you what it's like. But I did go to a talk. I had the guy who's in charge of this center come and speak to our National Trust Members Center and a year ago, and he was telling us all about what it was going to be like. I think it will be exciting. I wish I could tell you more about it. I know that Disney has been involved. There's a lot of hologram activity, and there are supposed to be knights that will come and face you eye to eye, hologram knights that will meet your eyes depending on what height you are. So Walker Lee, I want you to be in the battle. We're going to be going to a battle experience, and I want you to be our shorter person who will meet a knight eye to eye, because apparently the knights will bend down to meet you. And neither Keith nor I have been here, so as I said, it's been outbooked for over a year, and so we've got this timed entry. We will just go and experience it. Now, I do know that at 10:40, all of us need to go into this battle experience, and it's a timed entry thing. That's all I know. If we don't go in at that time, we don't go. So when I get in, I'm going to get instructions, exact instructions, and we're going to do what they tell us to do. If any of you decide you've had enough, I'm told there is a coffee shop, a place to sit down, and Keith will, of course, well, I can't say of course, I'm hoping that we will have one of the 3 coach parking places out in front of the center. It's run by the National Trust for Scotland. They have the exhibition center on the site where the battle was fought. If you want to walk out, there's a fabulous statue that's been there for many years of Robert the Bruce on his war horse, which, by the way, was a pony. That adds only more insult to injury for the poor old English king, who had the best knights in the realm, and even in Europe. So Robert the Bruce fought on a Scottish pony. And he used an axe, by the way. So when you go out to see the statue, you will see him astride his pony, and you will see him holding his axe.